Revenge with Karen.
Pack your box, Boomer, the 25-year-old manager laughed, the sound bouncing off the glass walls of the conference room like a rubber bullet. He didn't say it with malice, which almost made it worse. He said it with the casual, breezy arrogance of someone who has never had to balance a ledger in a recession. He was wearing a suit that was too blue, shoes that were too brown, and a smile that cost more than my first car. His name was Brent, was the new vice president of strategic revitalization, a title that meant absolutely nothing, but cost the company 6 figures a year. I sat there, hands folded on the mahogany table, a table I ordered back in 1998, and just looked at him. I didn't blink, I didn't cry, I didn't beg. My heart rate didn't even spike. After 25 years in operations, you learn that panic is just poor logistics. Before I tell you how I systematically dismantled this man's entire existence, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and upvote this post. It fuels the algorithm, and frankly, I'm going to need witnesses for the carnage I'm about to describe. Thanks. Now, back to Brent, who is currently tapping a stylus against an iPad I probably approved the purchase order for. Look, Ruth, he sighed, leaning back in a chair that was ergonomically designed to support a spine he clearly didn't have. It's nothing personal, really. We're just pivoting. The company needs to be agile. We need to be mobile first. We need fresh blood to interface with the Gen Z demographic. Your operational style is, well, it's vintage. And vintage is cool for denim, but not for logistics. He looked around the room for validation. The 2 interns, barely out of college, stared at their shoes. HR representative, a woman named Sheila whom I had helped through a messy divorce 3 years ago, wouldn't meet my eyes. She was aggressively taking notes on a blank page. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. So Brent continued, clapping his hands together. We've prepared a severance package. Standard industry stuff. 2 weeks' pay for every year served, capped at 6 months. We'll need your badge, your laptop, and your keys by 5 p.m. Oh, and Ruth, make sure you wipe the personal files off the drive. We don't want your cat photos cluttering up the server. He chuckled. The interns offered a weak, nervous laughter. They were terrified. They should be. I stood up slowly. My knees popped, a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the quiet room. I smoothed the front of my skirt. I walked over to the window, floor-to-ceiling glass looking out over the sprawling office park. The sun was hitting the pavement hard, baking the asphalt. I looked down at the employee parking lot, then at the manicured lawn, then at the cornerstone of the building itself. Understood, I said. My voice was level, no tremolo, no rage. Brent looked disappointed. He wanted a scene. He wanted the weeping old lady pleading for her pension. He wanted to feel powerful by denying mercy. My calm was robbing him of his climax. Great, he said, standing up and checking his Apple Watch. Got a lunch with the branding consultants. Sheila will walk you out. I walked back to my desk. It was an island of sanity in a sea of open-concept chaos. I had a fern that was older than Brent. I had a stapler that weighed 3 pounds and was made of actual metal. I had a framed photo of my late husband, Todd. I picked up the box HR had helpfully provided, a flimsy cardboard thing that wouldn't hold 25 years of memories. I started packing. Not everything, just the essentials, the fern, the stapler, the photo, a specific Rolodex that I kept offline filled with the personal cell phone numbers of every vendor, city council member, and zoning inspector in the Tri-County area. The office buzzed around me. People were whispering. I could feel their eyes, the pity mixed with relief that it wasn't them. Did you hear? Ruth got the axe, finally. She was such a fossil. I heard she used to print emails. I let them whisper. I let the humiliation wash over me, cold and slimy. It was necessary. It was the fuel. You see, when you've been somewhere for a quarter of a century, you become invisible. You become part of the furniture. And people say things in front of furniture they wouldn't say in front of a person. They do things in front of furniture they shouldn't do. Sheila hovered by my cubicle wall, clutching a folder. Ruth, I'm so sorry. You know this wasn't my call. Brent has the board's ear. They want a younger image. It's fine, Sheila, I said, dropping a stress ball into the box. Really, it's time for a change. You're taking this so well, she said, sounding relieved. Most people scream. I'm not most people, I said. I picked up my box. It wasn't heavy. I walked toward the elevators. I passed the break room where the coffee machine was broken again, a machine I usually fixed myself because maintenance was slow. I passed the server room where the cooling units hummed, units I had negotiated the service contract for. I passed Brent's new glass-walled office. He was in there, laughing on the phone, feet up on his desk. He saw me pass. He gave me a little salute, a mock gesture of respect that was entirely disrespectful. "Enjoy retirement, Ruthie," he called out through the open door. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking. Elevator ride down was silent. The lobby was cool and sterile. The security guard, Mike, looked confused. "Leaving early, Miss Ruth?" "Something like that, Mike," I said. "Take care of yourself." I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out into the heat. I walked to my 2018 Toyota Camry, placed the box in the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel. I didn't start the car immediately. I just sat there, staring at the building. It was a beautiful building, 4 stories of gleaming glass and steel. Prime location. Great highway access. I remembered when it was built. I remembered the smell of the wet concrete. I remembered the arguments over the zoning permits. Brent thought he had just fired an operations manager. He thought he had just trimmed some fat from the payroll. He thought he was the captain of the ship now. He didn't know that I wasn't just the crew. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, dialed a number I hadn't called in years, but one that was saved in my favorites. "Lawson and Associates," a voice answered. "Hello, David," I said. "It's Ruth." "Ruth, my God, I haven't heard from you since the lease renewal in 05. Is everything all right? How's the job?" I looked up at the 4th floor, where Brent was probably high-fiving the branding consultants. "I'm retired as of 10 minutes ago, David," I said, involuntarily. "I'm sorry to hear that," lawyer said, his voice dropping. "Age discrimination suit? We can file by morning." "No," I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips for the first time that day. "No lawsuits, that's too slow. I want to talk about the land, David. Specifically, the lease agreement for the headquarters." "The lease?" David sounded confused. "What about it?" "I want you to pull the file for the Ethelgard Holdings LLC," I said. "I want you to look at Clause 11B regarding structural modifications and code compliance. And then, David, I want you to initiate Phase 1. There was a pause on the line. Then, the sound of papers shuffling. "Ruth," David said, his voice changing from sympathetic to sharp. "Are you sure, if we trigger that clause, it's going to be messy?" I watched a pigeon land on the hood of my car. It looked at me, head cocked. "Brent wants a revolution," I whispered. "Wants to shake things up. I think we should help him." I started the car. The AC kicked in, blasting cool air into my face. "Do it," I said, and I hung up. I drove past the entrance sign, a sleek, modern monolith that had cost the company $20,000 last year to rebrand. It used to be stone. Now it was brushed aluminum. It looked cheap. It looked like something that would dent if you looked at it wrong. Just like the new management. As I merged onto the highway, my mind drifted back 20 years. It was 2001. The dot-com bubble had just burst with the violence of a supernova. Companies were folding overnight. Petscom was dead. The stock market was bleeding out in the street. Our company, then a scrappy mid-sized logistics firm founded by 2 brothers, Frank and Jerry, was on the ropes. They were cash poor, panicked, and staring down the barrel of bankruptcy. They needed liquidity. They needed it yesterday. They were selling everything: trucks, patents, office furniture. And they were about to sell the land the headquarters sat on to a predatory developer who planned to bulldoze it for a strip mall. I was the office manager back then. I was young, sharp, and I had just inherited a significant but quiet sum of money from my grandmother, a woman who didn't trust banks and buried gold bars in her crawlspace. I saw the value in the land. It sat on a major fiber optic junction and had dedicated access to the interstate. It was a gold mine disguised as a dirt patch. I went to Frank and Jerry with a proposal, but I didn't go as Ruth, the office manager. I went through a lawyer, hiding behind a shell company I named Ethelgard Holdings, named after a fierce queen I'd read about in a history book. I offered to buy the land for cash, slightly above market value, lease it back to them on a 99-year triple net lease. Frank and Jerry were so desperate they didn't even ask who was behind the LLC. They just saw the check. They signed the papers, high-fived each other, and saved the company. I saved the company. For 20 years, the company paid rent to Ethelgard Holdings. The checks went to a P.O. box, then to my lawyer, then to a trust. I never touched the money. I reinvested it. I bought more land, compounded the interest. To everyone in the office, I was just Ruth from operations who made good potato salad for the potlucks. To the county recorder, Ethelgard Holdings was a faceless entity that paid its property taxes early. Frank and Jerry retired 5 years ago. They sold their shares to a private equity firm. That firm installed a board of directors who cared more about quarterly projections than long-term stability. And that board hired Brent. Nobody from the new regime had bothered to read the original lease. Why would they? It was a legacy contract. It was on autopay. It was a line item in a spreadsheet that nobody questioned. Big mistake. I pulled into my driveway. My house was modest, a brick rancher with a well-tended garden. I didn't live like a secret land baroness. I lived like a woman who enjoyed silence. I carried the box inside and set it on the kitchen table. The silence of the house usually comforted me. Today, it felt charged, electric. I made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea. I didn't use a bag, I used loose leaf. I waited for the kettle to whistle. The ritual centered me. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sheila. He's already moving into your office. He's measuring the walls for vision board. I'm so sorry, Ruth. I took a sip of tea, a vision board, of course. I walked into my home office, room that looked more like a command center than a study. 2 monitors, a shredder, and a filing cabinet that locked with a physical key. I unlocked the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder, the original lease. The paper was heavy, high-quality bond. It smelled like old toner and victory. I flipped through the pages, scanning the legalese that I had helped draft 2 decades ago. Clause 4, rent escalation. Standard. Clause 8, maintenance responsibilities. Triple net meant they paid for everything. Clause 11b, structural integrity and alterations. Here it was. My weapon. Tenant shall not make any structural alterations, additions, or improvements to the premises, including but not limited to the removal of load-bearing walls, modification of electrical grids, or changes to the vent infrastructure, without the express written consent of the landlord. Failure to obtain such consent constitutes a material breach of this lease. Upon such breach, landlord reserves the right to terminate the lease with 30 days' notice and slash or demand immediate restoration of the premises to its original condition at tenant's sole expense. I knew for a fact Brent was planning a remodel. He had been bragging about it for weeks. He wanted an open-concept creative hive, wanted to knock down the walls between the engineering department and the sales floor to facilitate synergy. I logged onto my computer. I still had my access to the building's security cameras on my phone. I had set up the system, after all, and I knew the backdoor admin login that it never changed because IT was underfunded and overworked. I pulled up the feed for the 4th floor. There he was. Brent was standing in the middle of the engineering bay with a contractor. He was pointing at a wall, a load-bearing wall. I zoomed in. The contractor looked skeptical. He was shaking his head. Brent was waving his arms, doing that thing where he mimics an explosion with his hands to signify mind-blowing innovation. I could almost hear him saying, "Just get it done. Don't be a blocker." I took a screenshot. Then I pulled up the county permit records. I searched for the address. Oh, active permits. Brent wasn't just arrogant, he was illegal. He was bypassing the city permitting process because permits took time, and Brent wanted his creative hive ready for the Q3 investor showcase. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. The tea was warm in my hands. The anger I had felt in the conference room was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about education. I was going to teach Brent a lesson about due diligence. I picked up the phone and called David again. "Ruth, phase 1 is a go," I said, staring at the screen where Brent was now literally kicking the drywall to show how weak it was. "And David, get the eviction papers drafted, but don't file them yet. I want to let him spend some of his budget first." "You're terrifying, you know that," David said. "I'm just agile," I said. "I'm pivoting." 2 days later, I was in my garden, pruning the hydrangeas. It was a therapeutic kind of violence. Snip, dead weight gone. Snip, room for new growth. I had my iPad propped up on the patio table. I had hacked, accessed with legacy credentials, the company-wide Zoom link for the town hall meeting. On the screen, Brent was pacing back and forth on a stage that had been erected in the main atrium. He was wearing a headset microphone, looking like a TED talk reject. Behind him, a massive projector screen displayed a slide that just said disruption in bold, sans serif font. "We are not just a logistics company," Brent shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "We are a movement, we are a vibe. The old guard," he actually paused to make air quotes, "built this company on spreadsheets and paper trails. They built silos, they built walls. Literally, and what do we do with walls?" He held the microphone out to the audience. The employees, gathered in the atrium, mumbled something incoherent. They looked tired. The lighting in the atrium was harsh, and I noticed the AC was off. Probably a cost-saving measure Brent implemented to optimize overhead. We tear them down. Brent screamed, answering his own question. The slide behind him changed. It was a rendering of the new office layout. It looked like a kindergarten for adults. Bean-bag chairs, foosball tables, and a massive, open space where the structural columns used to be. I stopped pruning. I leaned in, squinting at the screen. He wasn't just removing drywall. The rendering showed the removal of 2 primary support columns on the east wing, the wing that held the heavy server racks on the floor above. My stomach dropped, not out of fear for my job that was gone, but out of fear for my building. If he cut those columns, the second floor would sag, the server racks would slide, the structural integrity of the entire east face would be compromised. The building wouldn't collapse immediately, but it would be uninhabitable within months. He was going to destroy a $40 million asset because he wanted a collaborative flow. I watched as he pointed to the rendering. Construction starts Monday. We're doing a demolition day team-building exercise. Everyone gets a sledgehammer. The crowd cheered weakly. Mandatory fun is the worst kind of torture. Picked up my phone. David, I said as soon as he answered. Change of plans. We can't wait for him to spend the budget. He's going to compromise the structural integrity on Monday. What? David asked. How do you know? He's live streaming his intent to commit gross negligence, I said dryly. He's handing out sledgehammers to the accounting department, David. He's going to have the intern from payroll taking swings at a load-bearing column. Jesus, David breathed. Okay, you want to do? Injunction? No, I said. An injunction is a slap on the wrist. He'll fight it. He'll spin it as legacy interference. I want to trigger the breach, immediately, but I want it to hurt. I looked back at the screen. Brent was now doing a trust fall off the stage into the arms of the terrified IT director. Prepare the notice to quit, I said. But first, I'm going to make a call to the city. If they're starting demolition on Monday, they need permits. I know for a fact the permit office hasn't seen an application for that address in 10 years. Ruth, David warned. If you call the code inspector, they'll shut the building down. The business will halt. They'll lose millions in operational downtime. I looked at my hydrangeas. They looked beautiful, orderly, well-maintained. They should have thought of that before they fired the person who maintained the permits, I said. Fair point, David said. I'll draft the letter. When do you want it served? Monday morning, I said. Right when the first sledgehammer hits the wall, I hung up. On the screen, Brent was now showing a slide of a nap pod. I closed the iPad cover. The screen went black. I went back to my pruning. The decision was made. It wasn't just about getting back at Brent anymore. It was about stewardship. I owned that land. I owned that steel and concrete. It was my responsibility to protect it from idiots. If protecting my property meant burning down the company that rented it, well, that's just the cost of doing business. I spent the rest of the weekend preparing. I didn't drink. I didn't sleep much. I organized my files. I printed out the emails I had saved, the ones where I had warned the previous management about the fragility of the East Wing. I printed out the architectural blueprints I had in my safe. I was building a dossier, not for a lawsuit, for an execution. Sunday night, I sat on my porch. The air was thick with humidity. I could hear the distant hum of the highway. Somewhere down that road, my building stood in the dark, waiting for the assault. I took a sip of iced tea. Hang in there, old girl, I whispered to the building I couldn't see. Mama's coming. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. Rain threatened, hanging low and heavy. It was perfect. I didn't go to the office. Obviously, I went to the county clerk's office. The clerk's office is a place where hope goes to die, buried under fluorescent lights and the smell of industrial carpet cleaner. But for me, it was a library of secrets. I walked in at 8:05 a.m. The clerk, a woman named Barb who had been there since the Reagan administration, looked up over her spectacles. Ruth, she squinted. I thought you were working corporate. Haven't seen you down here since the zoning dispute of 12. I'm freelance now, Barb, I said, sliding a box of donuts across the counter. Maple bars, your favorite. Barb's eyes softened. Bribery in local government isn't cash, it's pastries and politeness. What do you need, hon? I need to pull the jacket for 400 Innovation Drive, I said, and I need to see if any emergency variance requests were filed over the weekend. Barb tapped on her keyboard. The sound was rhythmically reassuring. Clack, clack, enter. Nope, she said, popping the lid on the donut box. Last permit on file is for signage change 3 months ago. Why, you hear construction? I heard rumors, I said, loud ones. Well, if they're hammering, they are illegal, Barb said, taking a bite of a maple bar. You want me to flag it for the inspector? Not yet, I said. I need a certified copy of the original deed and the easement agreement for the fiber lines. Barb printed them out. The stamp, certified copy, thudded onto the paper with a sound of finality. I took the documents and sat on a wooden bench in the hallway. I reviewed them. Everything was in order. My LLC, Ethelgard Holdings, was the undisputed owner. The easement was strict. No interference with subterranean infrastructure. If Brent knocked down that east wing wall, he wouldn't just risk the roof. He'd likely sever the grounding cables for the main server stack, which ran through the pillar he called an eyesore. I checked the time, 9:30 a.m. At the office, the demolition day party would be starting. I opened my phone and checked the security feed again. It was chaos. Brent had actually bought matching hard hats with the company logo. There were balloons. There was a DJ in the corner playing EDM at 9 a.m. The employees looked miserable, holding sledgehammers like they were foreign objects. Brent was shouting over the music. Okay, team, we're breaking barriers. We're smashing the status quo. Who wants the first swing? A young guy from sales, Chad, I think, stepped up. He looked eager to impress. I switched apps. I opened my email. I had drafted a message to the City Code Enforcement Division. Subject line, urgent, unpermitted structural demolition / life safety hazard / 400 innovation drive. I attached the screenshot of Brent pointing at the load-bearing wall. I attached the certified deed showing I was the owner and had not granted consent. I attached the blueprint highlighting the gas line that ran 6 inches behind the drywall they were about to hit. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. This wasn't just a prank. This was bringing down the thunder. People would be sent home. Fines would be levied. The company stock might take a hit. Then I saw Brent on the screen. He was taking a selfie with the sledgehammer. I hit send. I texted David. The eagle has landed. Serve the paper. I walked out of the clerk's office into the drizzle. I felt light. I drove to a coffee shop across the street from the office building. It was a hipster place with overpriced pour-overs, but it had a perfect view of the front entrance. I ordered a tea, sat by the window, and waited. At 10:15 a.m., the first vehicle arrived. It wasn't the police. It was a white Tesla with the city seal on the door. A man in a high-vis vest and a hard hat stepped out. He carried a clipboard like a weapon. Behind him, a red fire marshal SUV pulled up. I sipped my tea. You see, the thing about moving fast and breaking things is that eventually, the people whose job it is to keep things from breaking show up. And they don't care about your agile methodology. They care about the International Building Code. I watched as the code inspector and the fire marshal walked up to the automatic doors. The security guard, Mike, stopped them. I could see him gesturing. The inspector showed his badge. Mike stepped aside quickly. They disappeared inside. I checked the camera feed on my phone. Brent was mid-swing. He was winding up to smash a hole in the drywall. The music was thumping. Suddenly, the double doors to the office suite flew open. The fire marshal marched in, looking like a thunderstorm wrapped in a uniform. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He just walked over to the DJ booth and pulled the plug. The silence was deafening. Brent froze, sledgehammer in the air. He turned around annoyed. Hey, we're in the middle of a vibe shift here. The fire marshal walked up to him, looked at the sledgehammer, then at the wall, then at Brent. I couldn't hear the dialogue, but I saw the body language. The marshal pointed at the sledgehammer. Put it down. Brent hesitated. The marshal stepped closer. Brent dropped the hammer. Then the code inspector stepped forward, unrolling a set of blueprints. He pointed at the wall Brent was about to hit. He pointed at the ceiling. He pointed at the exit. Brent was waving his hands, doing the explosion gesture again. He was arguing. Bad move, Brent. Never argue with a man who can condemn your building with a sticker. The inspector pulled out a pad of red paper. He started writing. I smiled, blowing the steam off my tea. Phase 1 was complete. The disruption had arrived. The beautiful thing about the modern corporate ecosystem is how porous it is. Everything is content. Everything is shared. While the fire marshal was dressing down Brent in front of the entire staff, I wasn't just watching. I was curating. I saw the interns filming. Of course they were. They were filming the demolition day for their stories. Now they were filming the fire marshal roast, because it was objectively funnier. One of the videos hit TikTok within 10 minutes. It was from the account of a junior designer. Caption, Pav, your boss tries to knock down a load-bearing wall and the feds show up. Skull hash corporate life hash fail hash eviction. I saw it. I downloaded it. And then I forwarded it to the board of directors using an anonymous Proton mail account. Subject, risk assessment / brand liability / 400 innovation drive. Body, gentlemen, it appears the strategic revitalization is encountering regulatory friction. Please see attached media. Also, be advised that the leaseholder has been notified of the material breach regarding unpermitted structural modifications. I sat back in the coffee shop and watched the physical fallout continue. Fire Marshal was now taping a bright orange placard to the front door of the suite. Stop work order. Employees were filing out, looking confused. Some were laughing. Others looked worried they were being sent home. The creative hive was now a crime scene of stupidity. Brent was standing in the lobby, yelling into his phone. He looked frantic. His hair was messed up. The chill vibe was gone. My phone rang. It was my lawyer, David. Ruth, did you see the email? He asked, sounding breathless. Which one? I asked innocently. The board is freaking out. The CEO just called me. He wants to know who Ethelgard Holdings is. He's demanding a meeting with the landlord immediately. Tell him the landlord is unavailable, I said. Tell him the landlord is reviewing their options regarding the immediate termination of the lease due to gross negligence. Ruth, they're offering to pay a fine. They're offering to fix the wall. It's not about the wall anymore. David, I said, it's about the breach. Clause 11b, they violated the sanctity of the contract. Tell them Ethelgard Holdings is invoking the 30-day cure period, but since the breach involves criminal negligence, attempting demolition without a permit, we consider the lease voidable at our discretion. You want to evict them, truly? I want them to sweat, I said. I want the CEO to come down here. I want him to see the orange sticker on the door. And then, want a meeting? With Ethelgard? No, I said. With me? I don't understand. You will, I said. Just set it up. Tell him the landlord has designated a local proxy to handle the negotiations. Tell him the proxy is a former operations expert who knows the building intimately. Ruth, David paused. You're enjoying this too much. I'm just pivoting, David. I'm being a disruptor. I hung up. Across the street, a black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Was the CEO, Richard. I realized I called him David earlier. David is the lawyer. Richard is the CEO. My bad memory isn't what it used to be. Or maybe I just don't care enough about him to remember his name. Richard stepped out. He was a silver-haired man who looked like he smelled of scotch and golf course fees. He stared at the orange sticker on the door. He stared at the employees loitering in the parking lot. He looked furious. Brent ran out to meet him. I saw the interaction. Brent tried to explain using his hands. Richard didn't listen. He just pointed a finger at Brent's chest, a hard, stabbing finger. Brent shrank. He looked like a deflated balloon. I took a picture. This was the turn. The moment the power dynamic shifted, Brent wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was a liability. And Richard was realizing that he wasn't the master of his domain. He was a tenant. He had just pissed off the landlord. I finished my tea. It was cold, but it tasted sweet. I waited for Richard to enter the building, then I waited 5 minutes. Then I sent a text to Richard's personal cell number, a number I had because I used to book his travel when his executive assistant was out sick. Richard, I heard you have a problem with the building. I might be able to help. Meet me at the coffee shop across the street. Ruth. I watched him through the glass. Checked his phone. He frowned. He looked around. Then he looked across the street. He saw me. He hesitated. Then he started walking toward the coffee shop. Here we go. Richard entered the coffee shop looking like a man who had just swallowed a lemon. He spotted me immediately, hard to miss the woman in the sensible cardigan amidst a sea of beanies and flannel. He walked over, checking his watch. Ruth, he said, not sitting down. I don't have time for pleasantries. Have a building that's been red tagged and a VP who's apparently brain damaged. Why are you texting me? Sit down, Richard, I said, gesturing to the chair opposite me. You look flushed. High blood pressure is a silent killer. He sighed an impatient, rattling sound and sat. What is it? You want your job back, is that it? You saw the chaos and thought you could swoop in and save the day for a consulting fee? I smiled. I don't want my job back. I have plenty of work to do. I'm currently managing a portfolio of real estate assets. Good for you, he sneered. Look, if you have intel on the building, tell me. Did we miss a permit filing? Can you fix it with the city? I can't fix it, I said, because the violation isn't the problem. The problem is the lease. The lease? Richard waved a hand. We pay rent. We're fine. I have legal on it. You pay rent to Ethelgard Holdings, I said. He stopped. He looked at me sharply. Do you know the holding company name? That's confidential financial data. I know it, I said, leaning forward, because I am Ethelgard Holdings. The silence that followed was heavy. The espresso machine hissed in the background. A hipster laughed at a joke about oat milk, but at our table the air had been sucked out of the room. Richard blinked, once, twice. Excuse me, Ethelgard Holdings, I repeated. LLC formed in 2001. Sole proprietor, Ruth M. Vance. I bought the land from Frank and Jerry when you were still middle management at a firm in Chicago. I leased it back to the company. I've been your landlord for 20 years, Richard. He stared at me. His brain was trying to process the data, trying to reconcile the office matron image with the commercial real estate tycoon reality. That's impossible, he stammered. Conflict of interest. You were an employee. There's no clause in the employee handbook regarding passive real estate investments, I said smoothly. I checked, and frankly, I saved the company. But that's history. Let's talk about the present. Your boy Brent just violated Clause 11B, material breach. I can evict you today. Richard's face went pale. Ruth, come on, this is business. We can work this out. We'll fire Brent. He's gone, done. We'll repair the wall. We'll pay a penalty. I don't want a penalty, I said. I don't want money. Then what do you want? I want you to understand something, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You fired me because you thought I was obsolete. You thought I was slow. You thought because I didn't know how to make a TikTok, I didn't have value. But while you were chasing trends, I was building foundations. You were renting the space I allowed you to occupy. Richard looked terrified. Ruth, please, the investors. If we get evicted, the stock tanks. We're talking millions. Yes, I agreed. We are. I took a sip of my tea. I've already instructed my lawyer to file the eviction notice, I said. Unless what? Richard leaned in, desperate. Unless you publicly admit to the board and the staff that the strategic revitalization was a failure. Unless you reinstate the pensions you cut last year. And unless you apologize to me. Right now, it was petty, I know. Petness is a luxury you can afford when you own the dirt they stand on. Richard's jaw tightened. He was a proud man, a CEO. Apologizing to an operations manager was beneath him. He stood up. I won't be blackmailed by a disgruntled employee. We'll fight this in court. We have lawyers too. My lawyers wrote the lease, Richard, I said calmly. And your lawyers haven't read it in a decade. Go ahead. Fight. But remember, the court moves slower than a city inspection. Every day that red tag is on the door, you're bleeding money. He glared at me. You're enjoying this. I'm just pivoting, I said, throwing his own word back at him. He turned and stormed out. I watched him go. He was going to fight. Good, I hoped he would. I picked up my phone and texted David. He chose violence. File it. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in corporate entropy. David filed the eviction notice. It wasn't a secret. These things are public record. A savvy business reporter for the local paper picked it up. Headline, Tech Giant Facing Homelessness. HQ Landlord Files for Eviction After Botched Renovation. The stock dropped 4% by noon. Inside the building, or rather, via the Zoom calls of the displaced employees, panic was setting in. The rumor mill was on fire. Who is the landlord? Why are they kicking us out? Is Brent really fired? Yes, Brent was fired. It happened Tuesday morning. Richard threw him under the bus so hard I felt the impact from my house. But it was too little, too late. Richard tried to file an emergency injunction to stop the eviction. He claimed bad faith. He claimed I was acting out of personal animus. He wasn't wrong. But personal animus isn't a legal defense for breaching a contract. We had a hearing on Thursday. I wore my best suit, a vintage Chanel I'd bought at an estate sale. I sat next to David. Richard sat with a team of 3 lawyers who looked like they cost more per hour than my car. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Walters, looked over the documents. Mr. Henderson, she said to Richard's lead counsel, it says here your client attempted to remove a load-bearing wall without a permit, resulting in a stop work order from the fire marshal. Is this accurate? Your Honor, it was a misunderstanding regarding the scope of work. Lawyer argued. And the landlord is using this minor infraction to unreasonably terminate a long-standing lease. Minor infraction? Judge Walters raised an eyebrow. He tried to collapse the east wing, and the lease clause 11B seems quite specific. Any unpermitted structural change is grounds for immediate termination. Did you sign this lease? The previous owners signed it, the lawyer said. And you assumed the obligations, the judge said. Ignorance of the contract is not a defense. She looked at me, Miss Vance. You are the proprietor of Ethelgard Holdings? I am, Your Honor. And you are seeking possession of the premises? I am. I have concerns about the tenant's ability to maintain the asset. They have demonstrated a reckless disregard for safety and property value. Judge Walters nodded. Eviction granted. Tenant has 7 days to vacate. Richard looked like he had been slapped. His lawyers started to object, shouting over each other. The gavel banged. It was over. We walked out of the courtroom. Richard cornered me in the hallway. He looked 10 years older than he had on Monday. Ruth, he hissed, you're killing the company. We can't move in 7 days. We have servers. We have infrastructure. You're destroying 200 jobs. I'm not destroying them, I said. You did. When you decided that experience didn't matter. You decided that a shiny new MBA knew more than the people who built the place. You destroyed the culture. I'm just taking back the shell. We'll appeal, he threatened. Go ahead, I said, but you still can't enter the building. The fire marshal hasn't lifted the order, and I'm not signing the permit application to fix the wall until you're gone. He stared at me with pure hatred. You're a monster. No, Richard, I said, adjusting my scarf. I'm a boomer. Remember, we're stubborn. I walked away. My heels clicked on the marble floor. It was a good sound. 7 days. If you've never seen a corporate headquarters try to move in 7 days, it looks a lot like a colony of ants after you kick the anthill. Moving trucks lined the block. IT guys were weeping openly as they tried to rip servers out of racks without proper shutdown procedures. The Creative Hive furniture, the beanbags, the foosball tables, was tossed into dumpsters. I parked my car across the street and watched. I wasn't gloating. Well, maybe a little. But mostly I was witnessing the inevitable result of hubris. Sheila, the HR rep, texted me. It's a war zone in here. Richard is screaming at everyone. We're working 18-hour days packing. Ruth, did you really do this? I didn't reply. I couldn't. If I engaged, I might soften. And I couldn't soften. The lesson had to be complete. On day 4, got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Ruth, a young voice. Yes, it's Tyler from IT. The one who helped you with your printer that time. I remember you, Tyler, I said. You're a good kid. Ruth, man, look, I know they screwed you. Everyone knows. But if we lose the servers, we lose the client data. The company goes under. I have student loans, Ruth. I can't lose this job. I felt a twinge, a sharp little needle in my conscience. This was the collateral damage. Tyler, Sheila, the receptionist. The people who didn't make the decisions but suffered the consequences. Tyler, I said gently, do you trust me? I guess. Back up the critical data to the cloud tonight. Use the encrypted key I left in the safe in my old office. The code is 1998. You left a key? I always have a backup, Tyler. Save the data. Let the hardware go. Thank you, Ruth. Seriously. Don't tell Richard, I said. My lips are sealed. Hung up. I wasn't a monster. I was just a landlord with strict standards. By day 6, the building was a shell. The signage was stripped. The glass was dirty. It looked abandoned. Richard had tried one last Hail Mary. He offered me double the rent to stay. I sent the offer back with a red stamp, rejected. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about the respect. The night before the final eviction, I drove to the building. It was midnight. Parking lot was empty except for a security patrol. I walked up to the cornerstone, the one I had stared at the day I was fired. Dedicated 1995. I touched the cold stone. You're safe now, I whispered. The next morning, the sheriff would arrive to formally lock them out. The locks would be changed. The keys would be handed to me. I went home and slept like a baby. The sheriff's deputies arrived at 9:00 a.m. sharp. They were polite but firm. Property of Ethelgard Holdings, the lead deputy announced to the stragglers in the lobby. Vacate immediately. Richard was the last one out. He was carrying a box, much like I had been a few weeks ago. But his box wasn't filled with personal mementos. It was filled with legal notices and stress. He walked out the sliding doors. He looked defeated. His suit was rumpled. I was waiting for him, not in the coffee shop this time. I was standing on the sidewalk, right by the entrance. He stopped when he saw me. Are you happy? He asked. His voice was hoarse. I'm satisfied, I corrected. The building is safe. The code violations will be addressed. The asset is protected. You ruined us, he said. We have to move to a coworking space in the suburbs. The brand is tarnished. The brand was tarnished when you treated your people like disposable commodities, I said. I just accelerated the process. He shook his head, spat on the ground near my feet, classy to the end, and walked to his car. As he drove away, a silence fell over the lot. I walked up to the doors. The sheriff handed me the new keys. All yours, ma'am, he said. Thank you, deputy. I unlocked the door and stepped into the lobby. It was quiet. The terrible EDM music was gone. The smell of Brent's cologne was fading. I walked to the elevator. I went up to the 4th floor. I walked into my old office, one Brent had tried to turn into a zen zone. The walls were half painted. There were holes in the drywall. It was a mess. But it was my mess. I heard a noise behind me. I turned. It was Sheila. She had come back for a plant she forgot. She froze when she saw me. "Ruth, hi, Sheila." She looked at me, then at the keys in my hand, then at the empty office. "You," she started. "It was you? The whole time, you own the building." I didn't deny it. I just smiled. "You going to sell it?" she asked. "No," I said. "I think I'm going to lease it to a nice nonprofit, or maybe a library, someone who respects the structure." Sheila laughed. It was a shocked, slightly hysterical laugh. "You're a legend, Ruth. Everyone is terrified of you." "Good," I said. "Terror is good for logistics. Keeps people on schedule." I walked over to the window, the same window I had looked out of when Brent fired me. I looked down at the spot where my car had been. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of dust and potential. I had my dignity. I had my building. And I had a story that would keep the Reddit legal advice subforum busy for months. "Pack your box, boomer," I whispered to the empty room, mocking Brent's voice. I laughed. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and went home to feed my cat. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.